My name is Tyler. I work in engineering, so I'm used to data, logic, and things you can actually verify. My wife, Margaret, is the exact opposite. She has always believed in things like spirits, energy, and a bunch of other stuff I've always considered irrational. A year ago, we moved into a new house in Milwaukee. It was a quiet neighborhood. We were thrilled to move from our cramped apartment into a place that felt much more open and spacious. But the trouble started only about a week after we moved in. Margaret started suffering from insomnia. At first, she was just tossing and turning, but it quickly turned into her staying awake all night. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find her sitting up in bed, staring intensely at the bedroom door. She claimed she heard noises, but every time I checked, there was nothing there. A few days later, things got worse. She started jumping at every little sound, even the sound of my own footsteps. Then one evening, Margaret insisted there was something in the house with us. I shut her down immediately. Like I said, we see the world through two different lenses. We didn't fight much about it, but I could see the genuine fear in her eyes. About a month after we moved in, Margaret became convinced that a vengeful spirit was living inside our home. Our conversation started getting tense. I tried to explain it logically, telling her she was just stressed from the move and the lack of sleep, but Margaret wouldn't listen. Then one night, something happened that I couldn't explain away. I didn't wake up because of a noise. I woke up because of a vibration. The bed was shaking underneath me. It started light and then got stronger, like someone was trying to heave the mattress. I turned over and panicked when I saw Margaret having a seizure. Her whole body was stiff, her hands were clutching the sheets, and she was breathing rapidly. I shook her and kept calling her name. It took several seconds before she finally opened her eyes. I saw that ghost again. He was standing right at the foot of the bed, looking at me with eyes full of guilt, she whispered, squeezing my hand tight. I was exhausted from weeks of stress and no sleep, and I finally lost my patience. I told her seriously that she was likely having a psychological breakdown and that I was going to take her to see a doctor. Margaret said she wanted to bring a medium to the house to perform a seance before seeing a doctor. Of course, I was against it. But Margaret practically begged me, saying she couldn't take it anymore if we didn't try this. Finally, I gave in. The seance took place in the evening. The medium sat across from Margaret and started chanting things I didn't understand. At first, nothing happened. The air was silent. Then, suddenly, Margaret's body went rigid. She bolted upright with a sudden, sharp movement, as if she were being pulled up by an invisible force. Her eyes were wide open, but unfocused. Without a word, she turned and ran straight toward the basement stairs. The medium and I chased after her. Margaret was standing in the middle of the basement with her back to me. When I called her name, she slowly turned around. Her eyes were completely hollow. And then, a voice came out of her mouth. But it wasn't my wife's voice. It was a man's voice, deep, gravelly, and sounding incredibly sorrowful. She pointed at the floor and commanded me, "Dig it up. Please, dig this up." The look in Margaret's eyes was so terrifying that I didn't even argue. I grabbed a shovel from the corner of the basement and started digging. About 2 feet down, the blade hit something hard. A hollow thud echoed through the room, making my blood run cold. It was a wooden box, rotted by time. When I pried the lid open, a sharp, musty smell hit me. Inside was a complete human skeleton. I jumped back instinctively. Margaret, or whatever was controlling her, fell to her knees beside the box. The voice kept apologizing and begging for forgiveness. The seance ended shortly after as the medium finished her ritual, forcing the spirit to leave Margaret. The air in the room slowly returned to normal. Through the seance and the medium's explanation, we learned the whole truth. The spirit haunting the house was actually a doctor who used to live there. He wasn't a cold-blooded killer, he was a coward who had been drowned by his own guilt. 18 years ago, he had performed an illegal jaw surgery on a young girl. During the procedure, a terrible mistake happened, and the girl died on the operating table. Terrified that his reputation would be ruined, he didn't report it. Instead, he he panicked and tried to hide the body by burying it in this basement. He lived the rest of his life in agony, and when he died, his spirit couldn't move on. He was trapped in the house. He reached out to Margaret, using her body to lead us down there so the truth could finally come out. He used Margaret's sensitivity to spirits to bring his secret to light. While he was inside Margaret, his attitude was clearly one of deep regret. He kept emphasizing that the death was an accident and that fear had caused him to make a massive mistake. That very fear was what had imprisoned him there. After the bones were found and handed over to the police, the strange events in the house stopped completely. Margaret was finally able to sleep, and the house became as peaceful as it was meant to be. As for me, I still believe in logic. But I also understand now that there are some things in this world that go beyond human explanation. My name is Gray. This story happened 4 years ago, and it completely shattered my belief in human nature. At the time, I was a senior in high school in a small town in Ohio. One afternoon after school, I was walking past an abandoned house at the end of the block, just like I did every day. As I passed the side wall, I happened to notice a small combination lockbox mounted to the brick, right underneath an old gas meter. The lockbox stood out because it looked brand new compared to the decaying house. I kept walking, thinking maybe a realtor or a contractor had just put it there. But then it hit me. Why would anyone need a lockbox for a house that had been rotting and empty for years? The next morning, I grabbed my best friend Ryan and asked him to go back there with me. Ryan thought it was weird too, but he didn't obsess over it like I did. I've always been naturally curious, and I couldn't stop wondering about that house. Right as we were looking at it, Ryan's dad, Mr. Elton, drove by. When he saw us, he looked furious. He rolled down his window and yelled at us, telling us to stay away from abandoned properties because they were dangerous. We took off immediately. The following day, I went back to the house alone. I knew if I asked Ryan, he would just try to stop me. I just wanted one more look to satisfy my curiosity. When I got there, I noticed the lockbox had been moved slightly from the day before. I was positive of it. I reached out to touch it, and my fingers brushed against something wet. When I looked at my hand, it was smeared with a reddish-brown liquid that smelled exactly like iron. It was blood. I didn't hesitate. I ran straight to the police station to report it. An officer drove back to the house with me to check it out. They looked at the gas meter and the pipes behind the wall, and then gave me an explanation. They said it was just rusty water leaking from the old metal. They didn't even go inside. They just did a quick walk around and concluded there was nothing suspicious. The officer told me to go home and stop hanging around creepy, vacant lots. I left, but I wasn't convinced. A little while later, I circled back, and I was stunned to see Mr. Elton walking toward the abandoned house. I immediately ducked behind some bushes to watch. He walked right up to the lockbox, punched in a code like he'd done it 1,000 times, took out a key, and unlocked the front door. He stepped inside and closed it behind him. I stood there with my head spinning for a few seconds, then decided to wait and see what happened. About 30 minutes later, Mr. Elton walked out looking frustrated. He locked the door, put the key back in the box, and drove away. I waited until his car was out of sight before I approached the box. I tried to remember the movements his fingers made. After a few tries, the box clicked open. I was actually shocked that I had guessed the code. The key was right there. I held it in my hand, staring at the front door. My gut told me to run, but my curiosity won. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air inside was thick and suffocating. The first floor was empty and unremarkable, but as I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I started to hear a faint whimpering sound. My heart started thumping against my ribs. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, and I was terrified, but I couldn't turn back. I followed the sound to a room at the end of the hallway. When I pushed the door open, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. 3 girls were chained to the wall. They looked horrific, haggard and terrified. When they saw me, they lunged forward as much as their chains would allow, their eyes pleading. One tried to speak, but no sound came out of her throat. I stood there frozen for a few seconds before my survival instincts kicked in. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely pull out my phone to call 911. Just as I was about to dial, I heard the front door downstairs creak open. Footsteps started thumping on the floorboards below. The girls and I went dead silent. Only one thought went through my head. If Elton was back, we were all dead. As I scrambled to find a place to hide, a voice called out that shocked me even more than the thought of Elton. "I'm sorry I'm late." I stood still for a second and then sprinted down the stairs. I couldn't believe my eyes. Standing in the foyer was Emily, my younger sister. When she saw me, she looked just as confused as I was. I started shouting questions at her, and she told me she had received a letter from Mr. Elton. He had asked her to meet him here privately because he had something important to tell her. She had forgotten about the meeting and showed up almost an hour late. A wave of cold nausea washed over me. If Emily had been on time... I couldn't even finish the thought. 10 minutes later, the neighborhood was filled with sirens. Police and ambulances swarmed the house. The 3 girls were rescued, though they were physically and mentally broken. At the exact same time, another police unit raided Mr. Elton's office and arrested him at his desk in front of all his co-workers. They searched his office and his home, finding a mountain of evidence. The 3 girls he had been holding were all runaways who had been struggling with their families. Elton had lured them in through social media, promising them a place to stay. Instead, he brought them to that abandoned house, chained them up, and used them as his toys. The more I heard, the more disgusted I felt. Mr. Elton was my best friend's dad. I had known him for years. I had respected him, even looked up to him. He used to chat with Emily every time he came to my house to pick up Ryan. Back then, I just thought he was being a friendly neighbor. Now, looking back, I realized the way he looked at her was predatory. The thing that haunts me the most isn't the image of those girls in that upstairs room. It's the fact that my own sister was minutes away from becoming a monster's next victim. Ryan and I haven't spoken since that day. I lost my faith in the kindness of strangers, and I lost a lifelong friendship too.
My name is Louis, and I'm 32 years old. If I had to pick one story that has followed me almost my entire life, one that shaped how I see myself and the world around me, it would be the story of the man I believed was a hero for 19 years. When I was 4, my dad suddenly vanished from our lives. I don't remember a big goodbye or a specific argument. One day, I just realized he wasn't home anymore. I asked about him, and my mom told me he had moved to a different city for work. She didn't give me a long explanation. She just stood up, opened a drawer, and pulled out a photograph. In the photo, a man was wearing bright orange protective gear, standing in front of a shiny red fire truck. He looked exactly like the heroes I saw on TV. "That's your father at work," my mom said. I believed her instantly. I didn't have a single doubt. I felt so proud, I thought my heart would burst. From then on, out of all the things that made me feel special, nothing beat the fact that my dad was a firefighter. To a kid, a firefighter is basically a real-life superhero. However, my dad never called. There were no birthday calls, no cards in the mail. He never showed up for any important events. Every time I asked, my mom had an answer ready. Sometimes he was on a 24-hour shift. Other times the station was dealing with a massive fire and all communication was cut off. I felt disappointed, but the feeling always faded quickly because my mom would give me candy or a cup of hot chocolate. I continued to believe her like a good kid. When I was 12, my mom walked into my room with bloodshot eyes. I had never seen her look like that before. "Your father, he's gone." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. I just sat there staring at her, my mind completely blank. My mom grabbed me, held me tight, and sobbed. After she calmed down, she handed me a letter. At the top, it clearly said, "Phoenix Fire Department." It stated that my father had died in the line of duty during a warehouse fire in Tempe. I held that letter and read it over and over 3 times before I started crying. I eventually accepted that he was gone, but to be honest, it was just a shock that passed. My life with my mom didn't really change because my dad had never actually been there anyway. The thing was, the story of his death became my foundation. He had died performing a noble mission. Throughout high school and college, whenever I failed or wanted to quit, I thought of him. I told myself I couldn't be weak. I was the son of a man who ran into the fire to save others. I had to live a life worthy of that. I'd never suspected a thing. I never wondered why none of his fellow firefighters showed up to the funeral. I never asked why there was only one single photo of him. Everything shattered when I was 25, on the day of my wedding to Emily. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The wedding was on a cool autumn day. While the party was at its peak, I ran into my Uncle Rich, my mom's cousin. Instead of a typical wedding toast, he gripped my shoulder and whispered in a slurred, drunken voice, "Your old man was never a firefighter. He didn't die a hero. That was all just a lie your mother told you." The moment Uncle Rich said that, everything in my head went silent. I immediately looked across the hall at my mother. She was looking at me, smiling brightly. But then, she saw my look of pure shock and the smug grin on Rich's face. Her face went white. She quickly turned away and hurried toward the restroom. The rest of the party felt like torture. I just wanted it to end so I could get the truth from my mom. The next morning, I went to her apartment and demanded the truth. My mother cried for 2 hours before telling me a story that was worse than any horror movie. My father was never a firefighter. He worked at a used car lot in Phoenix. In June of 2000, when my mom filed for divorce after catching him cheating, something inside him snapped. In the early hours of August 14th, in a drunken rage, he came to the house with a gas can. He poured gasoline all around the front door and lit it on fire, intending to burn my mother alive inside. Luckily, I was staying at my grandma's house that weekend, so I wasn't there. My mom sobbed as she told me how the flames blocked the exit. She had to climb out of a back window and escape barefoot using a neighbor's ladder. My father just stood there, coldly watching the house burn before driving away. The police caught him 3 days later. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison for arson and attempted murder. He's currently serving his time at the state prison in Florence and is scheduled to be released at the end of this year. I sat there in silence, my fists clenched. My mom broke down, admitting she made up the firefighter story because I was so little and she didn't want me to grow up with that reality. I looked at her, my throat tight. I understood why she chose to lie to me for all those years. She was a victim too. The pain she carried was 10,000 times worse than mine because he was her husband. But she also carried the weight of me, a 4-year-old kid with no idea what was happening. She chose to carefully build a bright, shining memory for me instead of one filled with black smoke and the smell of burning wood. For 25 years, I lived, breathed, and grew up based on a lie. I worshipped a man who didn't exist the way I thought he did. I honestly don't know if I have the courage to face him. What would I even call him? I also don't know if there's any apology in the world strong enough to fix the damage and pain of the last 25 years. I grew up with the pride of being a hero's son. Now, I have to learn to live with a brutal reality. My father is a criminal, and his victims were his own wife and son.
My name is Henry. Many years ago, I left my small hometown to build a career in the city. My job was so busy that I rarely had time to visit my family. Short phone calls on the weekends eventually became the only way I knew what was happening back home. My family was broken. My father had an affair and walked out on us years ago. Even so, he kept sending monthly child support payments. Because of that, my mother continued to live in our old house with my brother Ethan, who is 10 years younger than me. About 2 weeks ago, my mom called me and sounded quite happy. She told me that Ethan had finally agreed to go out and find a job, and that he had moved into his own place. I was truly shocked. After being severely bullied in high school, Ethan's mental health had become unstable. He dropped out of school, cut off his friends, and spent almost all of his time locked in his bedroom. However, I started thinking more about my mom. If Ethan had moved out, it meant she was living all alone. I felt a sudden wave of guilt for being away for so long. I decided to use my vacation days to go back home in secret, planning to give her a surprise visit. The morning I arrived, my mom opened the door with a look of both shock and joy. She hugged me tight and asked a million questions. But after talking for a while, I noticed something was off. She looked exhausted, her face was noticeably thinner, and she had dark circles under her eyes as if she hadn't slept in days. Her behavior was especially strange. When I mentioned Ethan's new job and his move, her eyes suddenly darted away and her smile became forced. She just brushed it off and then told me, in a very serious voice, that I was not allowed to go into Ethan's room. I was surprised and asked why. She just said it was a mess and she hadn't had time to clean it. The weird thing was that she repeated it over and over. I was absolutely forbidden from entering that room. The fear and secrecy in her eyes made my suspicions flare up. While she was out at the grocery store, I snuck in and opened my brother's door. The sight inside made me freeze in my tracks. The room wasn't just messy, it was eerily bizarre. Every single wall and even the ceiling were covered in thousands of yellow slips of paper. They weren't taped up neatly, they were smeared and layered over one another. Looking around, I felt like I was standing inside a giant yellow cocoon. I stepped closer to look. On several of the papers, there were scribbled words repeating the same phrase over and over. You are never alone. A sense of dread began to creep in, but I didn't confront my mom right away. That night, something else happened. While I was sleeping, a strange noise coming from Ethan's room woke me up. I went into the hallway and peeked through the cracked door. In the faint light, I saw the curtains twitching as if something was moving behind the fabric, even though the window was closed tight. I gathered my courage and flipped on the light, but the curtains were perfectly still. I went back to my room. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with confusion over what I had just seen. A few days later, while my mom was out again, I searched Ethan's room more thoroughly. This time, I found a yellow-covered book hidden under a pile of papers. The cover read, "Seal of the Light. You are never alone." Curious, I opened it and read a few pages. The content was hard to understand, repeating passages about the light and purification. I searched the book's title online. The information I found made my blood run cold. This book belonged to a cult called the Path of Heavenly Light. They believed that people can only be truly set free when they leave the old world to enter the true light. They emphasized taking people who live in isolation and moving them into communal living as a way to help them reintegrate into society. But the way it was described gave me a sickening feeling. It felt like behind the words of salvation was a disguised human trafficking network. The more I read, the more uneasy I felt. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I took the book and demanded the truth from my mom as soon as she walked through the door. My mom almost collapsed into a chair and burst into tears. After a long time, she tremblingly confessed that Ethan had left in the middle of the night a few weeks ago. He only left a short note that said, "I have found the place of true light." She told me the cult had brainwashed him. I asked about Ethan's room and why she had forbidden me from going inside. She explained that she had recently gotten a cat for company. Since I have a very severe allergy to animal hair, she kept the cat inside Ethan's room. So, I figured that maybe that night, the cat had crawled behind the curtain and moved it. It wasn't a ghost or my imagination. Looking at my mom sitting there, so thin and tired, I felt incredibly guilty. For years, I had basically left her alone to carry so much pain in this house by herself. But once I calmed down, I still had a nagging feeling. Things didn't seem quite right. In this family, there was only one other person who might know what had really happened. After several days of hesitation, I picked up the phone and called my father. The conversation turned tense quickly. At first, he seemed annoyed when I mentioned the cult, but after a long silence, he sighed and said something that stunned me. It was actually my mother who had fallen into the cult first. He said her obsession with the group led to constant fighting and destroyed their marriage. I held the phone, not knowing how to react. In my head, I kept seeing the image of my mom from a few days ago. the exhausted woman crying and telling me the cult had brainwashed Ethan. The two stories completely contradicted each other, and I didn't know who to believe. My father added that ever since Ethan turned 18, he had stopped sending all support payments. That had put my mother in a difficult financial situation for a long time. The call ended. I sat in silence for a while, my head spinning with unanswered questions. The next day, while my mom was busy in the kitchen, the landline in the living room rang. I picked it up and heard the voice of our neighbor. She sounded annoyed and said she had been looking after our cat for almost a week now. She asked when my mother was going to come and pick it up. I was completely confused and didn't know what to say. Then, it suddenly hit me. I had also been home for exactly 1 week. That meant on the very first day I arrived, my mom had sent the cat to the neighbor's house. Therefore, the thing moving behind the curtain in Ethan's room that night couldn't have been the cat. Furthermore, I had walked into that room many times and never had a single allergic reaction. The scattered puzzle pieces in my head began to fall into place. Perhaps that night, it was my mom who had been in Ethan's room performing the rituals the cult taught her. When she heard a noise at the door, she must have hidden behind the curtain, causing it to move in the dark. I shuddered as an even more terrifying theory emerged. If what my father said was true, my mother was the one brainwashed by the cult. In her desperation over money and the pressure of life, she might have handed Ethan over to them. In her mind, she might have believed it was the only way to free them both, getting rid of the burden while receiving what she believed was salvation, or perhaps even money. I sat in the living room for a long time. I realized this tragedy wasn't just my mother's fault. Part of it was on me. If I had cared more about my family, maybe things would never have gone this far. I decided to face it all. I need my mother to tell me the truth, no matter how cruel the answer might be.
My twin sister and I have a terrifying secret. I'm Robert, and my twin sister is Laura. Our family of 4 lives in a mobile home. We move every day along the roads through towns, cities, and states. My parents always choose empty lots or wooded areas for the family to spend the night. My sibling and I didn't attend school like other children. Instead, we followed an online program. It may sound deprived and unfortunate, but my family was still very happy for 13 years. One evening, after our parents went to sleep, my sibling and I snuck into the forest to play. Because we spent 90% of our time in the van, we were very curious about everything around us. Laura clutched the hem of her shirt tightly, following closely behind as I held the flashlight to light our way. The sudden rustling sounds of leaves being disturbed startled us. We stood frozen for a moment until a growling sound signaled the approach of a large and terrifying creature. I grabbed Laura's papers in her hands. The box was something my dad used to prop up the driver's seat every day, and I thought the papers were just some kind of advertisements. But Laura handed them to me with a very serious expression. That was our birth certificate, but our parents' names were Owen Taylor and Anna Taylor, while our current parents are Maria and Louis. There were also a few old newspapers. June 13, 2000. A case of 2 missing twin children under 6 months old received significant attention. November 20th, 2000. The mother of the 2 children, after months of desperately searching for her kids, went insane. The father did not give up. He was willing to pay any price and do whatever it took to find his children. April 4th, 2004. The father, after many years of searching, accidentally encountered the 2 children in a park. With the identifying features, he was certain they were his 2 children. However, the kidnappers attacked him and took them away. Once again, the man fell into despair as he lost his children for the second time. There is a hand-drawn sketch of the 2 kidnappers in the article, and it's shocking how much it resembles our current parents by about 70%. An article also included a letter that the father wrote to his two children. Dear Robert and Laura, my beloved children, I don't know where you are right now, but remember that your parents always love you. I will try to find you and bring you back, so please stay healthy. I looked at Laura. Her eyes were red and her body trembled from shock. I didn't think much, grabbing Laura's hand and ran out of the car, running fast and far to a police station to ask for help. We were kept at the police station for our safety. Laura couldn't stop crying. I knew she was very scared. That very night, a man came to the police station. He looked at us for a long time before kneeling down and bursting into tears. He was our biological father. Our adoptive parents were wanted and captured 2 days later after going into hiding. It was difficult, with feelings of guilt and regret, as we had reported the people who had taken care of us for 15 years. But according to the police, we would soon have been sold by that couple as valuable goods. My brother and I were taken back to our hometown in Ohio, living in the spacious house we had long dreamed of. Although there are still distances and unfamiliarity, we will gradually adjust because we know that this place truly has the love of family.
I am Kate, 25 years old, a female graduate student with a peculiar passion for psychological stories. That passion sometimes feels like a curse, haunting me constantly. The house I rent is in a cold suburban area of Michigan, where the winter winds claw at the windows. It's cheap, old, and has a dark basement I rarely visit. But with its low rent and the quiet surroundings perfect for research, I couldn't ask for more. Lately, strange sounds have been appearing at night. The creaking of floorboards, persistent whispers. I assumed it was just the house being too old. One time, I went down to the basement to find some things. The basement door was slightly ajar, even though I was sure I had closed it. A lingering anxiety followed me like a shadow, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Then, one night, the power suddenly went out while I was working on my thesis. The house was swallowed by cold darkness. I moved down to the basement, checked the fuse box, searching for the reason the power was out. The flashlight beam shone through the basement door, and I smelled a musty odor rising up. The basement door was slightly ajar again, but this time I was sure I hadn't forgotten to close it. When I pushed it open, I saw faint shoe prints in the dusty stairs, muddy marks leading downward. The weak flashlight flickered over an old backpack, its contents spilling out chaotically. I picked through the items one by one: a sealed food container, a rusty kitchen knife, a bent lighter, and finally, some old newspapers alongside a photograph. In the picture, a family of 3 beamed with joy. The man kissed a little girl on the cheek, while the woman lovingly embraced them both. The girl's eyes sparkled with innocence and warmth. Suddenly, the basement door, powerful note seeped into the cold darkness around me. My body shuddered involuntarily. I used to sing that song to my daughter every night before bed. He trembled, as if struggling to hold himself together. We were a happy family. My wife and daughter were the most precious things in my life, but everything shattered in just one night. They said I killed them. His voice hardened, raw with pain and anger. But I didn't. Why would I destroy my own life? I forced myself to take a deep breath, focusing on his voice, analyzing every nuance in his words. Is he telling the truth, or is this just another story to deceive me? The question echoed in my mind, urging me to face it instead of giving in to fear. I ran away, not because I was guilty, but because no one believed me. I need to find the truth. I need to find the one who tore my family apart. He paused, his voice choking with emotion. I've wandered, hiding from every gaze, drowning in grief and guilt over my wife and daughter. His sorrow reached its peak, and he began to sob. I looked down at the scattered belongings in the backpack, my trembling hands picking up the old newspaper. The headline read, "Massacre, Husband Named Prime Suspect." Below, a wanted notice displayed a sketch of the suspect, his face. I glanced at the family photo again. It was him and the happy family mentioned earlier. A whirlwind of emotions crashed over me. I feared, but also felt an inexplicable sense of empathy. If he was telling the truth, then he was not a murderer, but a fugitive running from a crime he didn't commit. A broken man. Thank you for listening. His voice was soft now, as if a weight had been lifted. I heard the basement door unlock. I stared at it, my chest rising and falling rapidly. I sat in the darkness, my heart still pounding. But strangely, the panic had faded. Light from the hallway filtered down like an escape route. I stood up. My eyes glanced at the happy family photo one last time. When stepping out of the basement, the house became strangely quiet, as if the man had never existed. But his words still echoed in my mind. I left everything in the basement except the old newspaper. Finally, I sent it along with an anonymous letter to the police station, hoping that the truth would be revealed. I moved to another budget apartment, where there was no basement or old windows anymore. Every night before sleeping, I still wonder, will he really find justice for his family, or will he continue to live in hiding with that dull pain? Never in a million years did I think a gift from my boyfriend Ramon would turn into my worst nightmare. He got me this gift certificate for Serenity Spa, saying I'd been working too hard and needed a day to relax. I wasn't totally pumped for a great day, but when we got there, it was a letdown. The parking lot was empty, nothing like the fancy pictures on the website. The only car around was this old truck parked near the back door, windshield covered in dust. The Serenity Spa sign was all faded and barely hanging on, swaying in the wind like it was about to give up. We had just stepped out of the car when this woman stumbled out of the spa. Her skin was ghostly pale, eyes blank, like she'd just seen something straight out of a horror movie. The woman suddenly grabbed my hand, her voice shaky as she muttered, "You'd better get out of here." Then she took off, not even glancing back. I just stood there, staring after her, but Trisha shrugged it off, told me I was overthinking, and headed straight into the spa. Inside, it was way gloomier than I expected. The old yellow lamps barely lit up the place, making it feel more like some rundown bar than a spa. The air reeked of lavender essential oil, not the calming kind, but overpowering, thick, and suffocating. At the reception desk, an old woman gave us this weak smile. Her eyes were cold. "Welcome to Serenity Spa. Please leave your phone at the counter for the best relaxation experience." I hesitated, but Trisha casually dropped her phone, flashing me a look that basically said, "You're being paranoid." Not wanting to be the weird one, I followed her lead. We got led into the massage room. The loudspeaker crackled, telling us to lie face down on the bed. As we got settled, the door creaked open, and 2 staff members walked in. They didn't say a word, just started working like they were on autopilot. The second their hands touched me, I shivered. Their skin wasn't soft like a professional masseuse. It was rough, calloused, like someone who did hard labor. But their movements weren't bad, so I didn't think too much about it and eventually let myself relax. By the time the massage was over, my body felt looser, way more comfortable, and I was starting to get a little sleepy. Next, they led Trisha and me to the sauna. The hallway to the sauna was long, narrow, and kinda dark. I glanced over at Trisha. She still looked excited, totally unfazed by the weird, heavy vibe hanging in the air. When we got to a big wooden door, the old receptionist stopped and turned to me with this weird smile. I was about to follow Trisha inside when she gently lifted her hand, stopping me. "This way, please." She gestured toward another door. I frowned. She just tilted her head slightly, like she was watching for my reaction. Then, real slow, she said, "We have individual treatments for each client." I turned to Trisha, expecting her to say something, but she just shrugged, totally unbothered. "It's probably just how they do things, chill," she said, patting my hand before heading into the room across from mine. I pressed my lips together and stepped into my sauna, feeling a little uneasy. The room was smaller than I expected, airtight, the wooden walls making it feel even more cramped. Steam filled the space, thick and heavy, settling into my skin. I sat down on a long wooden bench, trying to let my body relax, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. A few minutes later, this floral scent drifted through the air. At first, it was nice, relaxing even. But then, out of nowhere, I started feeling dizzy. Something was definitely off. I couldn't sit still anymore. I jumped up from the bench. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I bolted for the door, hands shaking as I grabbed the doorknob and shoved it open. Stepping into the hallway, I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my brain, then ran straight to the room across from mine, the one Trisha had gone into. The sauna door was wide open, but she wasn't there. Panic hit me like a truck. I spun around and sprinted to the reception desk, barely able to catch my breath. "Where's my friend?" My voice came out shaky, almost frantic. The old woman behind the counter still had that same eerie smile, her eyes blank and cold. "You came here alone." My whole body locked up, but my heart was racing like crazy. I shook my head over and over, refusing to believe what I had just heard. "No, I came with Trisha. We walked in together. What did you do to her?" I was practically screaming, but the woman just shook her head, still wearing that weird, knowing smile. Panic surged through me. I demanded my phone back. She frowned like I was being a nuisance, then listened to something on her walkie-talkie before reluctantly handing it over. I wasted no time. I called the police. They showed up in about 10 minutes. I told them everything, pointing at the reception desk where the woman still stood, completely still, and then toward the sauna room. One officer stayed to talk to me, while the other went over to check the security footage. The screen flickered on, and I watched. There I was, pushing open the door, walking down the hallway, stopping at the front desk, chatting with the receptionist, taking the gift certificate, and heading to the changing room. But it was just me, no Trisha. How the hell was this possible? I knew she was with me. I heard her laughing in the car, and yet in this video she didn't exist. I stumbled back, feeling like the ground beneath me was crumbling, dragging me into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I yelled at them to check again, begged them to look closer, but all I got were pitying glances from the policeman. Then they called a psychiatrist. I fought against it, trying to explain, trying to make them understand. But the more I talked, the more convinced they were that I was losing it. They checked my phone. No text from Trisha. There was nothing. No texts, no photos, no calls, no proof that Trisha had ever been a part of my life. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The police called Ramon. When he showed up, I felt this tiny flicker of hope, like maybe he would believe me. But then I looked into his eyes, and I knew. He didn't believe me either. He squeezed my hand tight, his voice soft, like he was calming a scared kid. "Baby, you must be imagining things. You're just stressed." I stared at him, wide-eyed, my whole world crashing down. Shocked, hopeless, dizzy, weak. I barely resisted as Ramon led me home. 3 days later, I forced myself to go to the police station. I needed answers. I sat there, completely still, gripping the cold metal chair, my eyes locked on the computer screen in front of me. The security footage from Serenity Spa played again. The cops rewound it over and over, checked every angle, but nothing changed. No way. My voice shook. This can't be right. The officer next to me glanced over, a flicker of concern in his eyes. He let out a small sigh, then turned toward another cop standing by the door. The guy nodded and walked out without a word. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. A woman in a white coat stepped inside. "Hello, Vanessa. I'm Dr. Carter, the police department's psychologist." My whole body went stiff. It felt like I was slowly sinking into freezing water, my breath catching in my throat. They thought I was crazy. "No, I shook my head hard. No, I'm not crazy. Trisha was there. She was with me. I remember. Please, you have to believe me. I broke down again. My nerves stretched so thin they felt like they were about to snap. Helpless, trapped. I screamed just to get it all out. The months after that were a blur. The doctor put me on sedatives. Ramon never left my side, taking care of me like I was fragile. My family hovered, worried sick, so I learned to fake it. I pretended I didn't remember what happened at Serenity Spa. Pretended I really was losing my mind. Pretended it was all just some hallucination. Only then did they stop looking at me with pity. Only then did they stop forcing me into endless therapy sessions. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, half watching TV, when a news report came on. A bizarre accident in front of the police station. A woman, dead, her body mutilated. I couldn't look away from the screen. It was her, the same woman who had stumbled out of Serenity Spa that day. I was in shock, my chest tightening like I was about to cry. Right then, Ramon walked in. I bolted to the bathroom, gripping the sink, taking deep breaths to calm down. Something was off. Something was seriously wrong. One evening, I was cleaning out the car. In the dim light, I noticed something roll across the floor. A bracelet. Trisha's bracelet. I picked it up, my whole body going cold. I knew it was hers. I had seen it on her wrist that morning when we left the house, when she sat right next to me in the car. So how the hell did it end up here? If Trisha had never existed, like everyone kept telling me, then why was her bracelet sitting in my car? I clutched it tight, my confusion twisting into something darker, pure, bone-deep fear. It all started with that damn gift certificate, the one Ramon gave me. He was the one who insisted I bring Trisha. He was always the one saying I had issues, always pushing me into therapy. What if? I kept my mouth shut, played along, but I couldn't sleep. Every night, the nightmares came. Serenity Spa, that woman, Trisha disappearing. I needed answers. One morning, after Ramon left early for work, I snuck into his office. I'd never paid much attention to this place before, but now I was seeing it with new eyes. I started searching, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I found it, a USB drive tucked behind a stack of documents. My hands were shaking as I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered on. A video. Files. On the screen, there I was standing inside Serenity Spa, and right next to me was Trisha. Everything I told the police was right there on the screen. This was the proof. I wasn't crazy, but what really shattered me was the last file. It was a list of names, each with a date next to it. Women, customers, victims, goods. I scrolled through the list, and my world fell apart when I saw a familiar name, Trisha. The date next to her name was the exact day we went to Serenity Spa. Ramon had lied to me. He knew exactly what Serenity Spa was. He was part of it, which meant I had been living with a monster. I sent the video and the victim list to everyone I could, my parents, my friends, my co-workers, the police. I didn't have time. I had no idea how closely Ramon had been watching me, or how many hidden cameras were in this apartment. One thing was clear, I had to disappear before he found out I knew the truth. But as soon as I stepped out the door, Ramon was there, standing with that twisted smile, half amused, half furious. I was just a tool for you to cover up your mess, and soon I'd be just another piece of merchandise like them, right? Or would I end up like that woman if I tried to fight back? My legs felt like they were about to give out, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The cops shouted at Ramon to stay put. "This won't end that easily," he hissed. Then everything went black. But even as I passed out, I knew I was safe. I woke up in the hospital and started writing all of this down. The case was still under investigation. Ramon and his accomplices had chosen to stay quiet. No one knew where Trisha or the other victims were, or if they were even still alive. But I refused to give up hope. I thought I'd gotten a great deal on a house until I discovered the horrifying secret hidden inside. I'm Maya, a freelance designer. In March of last year, I decided to leave Los Angeles. City life had exhausted me. The endless traffic, skyrocketing rent, and the feeling of loneliness in a city of millions. I wanted to find a quiet place, a small town in Northern California, to start a new life. I finally chose a small town called Grass Valley, nestled among the pine forests of the Sierra Nevada. On Craigslist, I found a house for an unbelievably low price. I called the seller immediately. "Hi, I'm Will," a tired voice answered. I asked about the house, and he explained that it was old in a secluded area, and he wanted to sell it quickly. Will emphasized that he only accepted cash because he didn't trust banks or real estate agents. I scheduled a time to see the house before making a decision. A few days later, I drove 3 hours from Los Angeles to Grass Valley to see the house. Will was a middle-aged man with an unapproachable demeanor. The house was old but sturdy, surrounded by many trees and about 5 miles from town. When I asked him why he was selling it so cheaply, Will was silent for a moment, then said, "My wife, Ella, disappeared 2 months ago. I'm desperate to find her. Everything in this house reminds me of Ella, and I just can't stay here anymore." I was quiet after hearing Will's story, feeling sympathy for him instead of the unapproachable feeling I had at first. As Will showed me around the house, I heard a faint scratching sound from inside a wall somewhere. "What's that?" Will shrugged. "Squirrels and mice. They've been a problem for years. It's because of all the trees around here." Will generously offered to include all the tools and building materials if I agreed to buy the house, since he didn't need them anymore. I signed the contract that same day and gave Will the full amount in cash. Before he left, he stood there for a long time, looking around as if he was very attached to the place. 3 days later, I moved in with my best friend Levi to help me fix up the house. Levi is a contractor, so I completely trusted him to make all the decisions. On the first day, we planned to repaint the living room. As we took down all the items hanging on the walls, I noticed a picture of a woman with long hair. This must have been Ella, the wife Will mentioned. I carefully put the picture in a corner. When we started painting the walls, the scratching sound returned. This time it was louder and more frantic. "That animal sounds pretty big and strong," Levi said. "We should probably call a service to handle it." We turned on some music to drown out the noise and continued our work. By the third day, as we were cleaning out the basement, I heard a faint sound, like someone crying. "Did you hear that?" I asked Levi. He stopped what he was doing and listened. "It's probably just the wind." But the next day, the crying returned, along with some screaming. At this point, we started to feel uneasy, but I had put all my money into this house. I had no choice but to continue with my plan. The next day, while doing some repairs in the basement, we discovered a wall that looked strange. The bricks and mortar were newer than the rest. "This wall was built recently," Levi said, touching the surface. "There might be another room behind it." After some discussion, we decided to break down the wall. After nearly an hour, we had created a large enough opening for us to go inside. Levi went first, shining his flashlight. Immediately, we were hit by an overwhelming stench. The flashlight beam swept around the room. We realized it was a small, windowless room with a low ceiling. Then I noticed the long brown hair of a woman. She was lying face down on the concrete floor, her body curled up. I screamed, clutching onto Levi, my heart pounding. He was also panicked and quickly shined the flashlight into another corner. But by doing so, we accidentally discovered the next horror. In the opposite corner, another woman was sitting, leaning against the wall, her head bowed. This time, Levi screamed even louder than I did. Suddenly, the woman slowly looked up. Her lips moved as if she was trying to say something. I started to walk towards the woman, despite Levi's attempts to stop me. My emotions were incredibly mixed at that moment. There was shock, disbelief, and a little anger. This was the house I had put all my money and effort into buying. I couldn't accept that it held such a horrifying secret. When I got closer, the woman looked at me with a look of great hope. On the wall near her, there were countless claw marks with dried blood on them. I realized this was the source of the scratching we had been hearing for the past few days. It was only then that I truly understood the horror of the situation. This woman had been locked in here for months, living in absolute darkness, with no food, only drops of water leaking from a pipe. She had been living next to a dead body. I pulled out my phone with a trembling hand and called 911. The police and an ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. They took the surviving woman to the hospital immediately and secured the scene. I sank into a chair and buried my face in my hands, crying. I knew I had been scammed, and all my plans and dreams were shattered. Levi sat down and comforted me for a long time. That day, the police arranged for us to stay somewhere else. 2 days later, the investigating officer called me. The woman who survived is Ella Thompson, the wife of Will Thompson, the man who sold me the house. The woman who died is Anna Kim, 24 years old. Ella had told us the whole truth. Anna Kim had come to the house to demand that Will leave his wife and marry her, threatening to tell Ella everything. Will killed Anna in a fit of rage, and when Ella threatened to call the police, he locked both of them in the room and sealed the wall. I felt stunned and cried a lot again when I learned the whole truth. Will was arrested at a motel in Sacramento. He confessed to murder and unlawful imprisonment. Ella recovered after 3 weeks of treatment at the hospital. As for me, I put the house back up for sale after having everything in the basement completely cleaned out. I'm living in a small apartment now. I learned an expensive lesson. Nothing is cheap and good in this world, and certainly nothing is free. My name is Carrie. When I was a kid, a babysitter would often watch me. She was the daughter of one of my dad's coworkers. At the time, I really disliked her. She was a terrible babysitter. I had other babysitters that I liked, so I knew how bad she was. She didn't seem to want to do the job at all. She was always overly strict with me, only caring about following my parents' rules. I was used to having to yell out and announce that I was coming downstairs whenever I wanted to get a glass of water after bedtime. I didn't even dare to turn on my nightlight because she required me to sleep with my door open so she could easily check on me at any time. However, one night when she came over, she seemed different. I remember my parents told her that it was okay to go home if she wasn't feeling well. She refused, just saying that she was a little tired and would take a nap after she got me to bed. And indeed, she looked very tired. She was dozing off while I was eating dinner. To be honest, her carelessness made me much more comfortable than usual. I thought that if she was like this every time she watched me in the future, I wouldn't have to be afraid every time she came over. She even forgot to get me to bed on time, so I had an extra 45 minutes of TV time while she dozed off on the sofa. Her hand was even in the position of scrolling on her phone. That made me laugh with delight. She finally woke up and told me to go to bed. It was strange that she didn't show any annoyance when she saw me bending the rules. A few hours later, I woke up and was very thirsty. I poked my head into the hallway and started to call for her. I asked for permission to go downstairs to get a glass of water, as we had agreed. But for the first time, I didn't hear an answer. There were no familiar lines like, "Oh my God, what do you want now?" or "Go back to sleep, kid." Nothing, except for the buzzing of the TV downstairs. I thought it was strange. I thought something was wrong. So, I decided to go downstairs to look for her without permission. I saw that the bathroom door was closed and the light was on. That told me she was in there. I stood in front of the bathroom door for a few seconds. I was really worried about getting in trouble for being downstairs after bedtime. But then, I suddenly remembered that she hadn't been feeling well since she arrived. I thought maybe something had happened to her. I knocked on the door and called her name again. To my surprise, the door was unlocked. It's very strange to go to the bathroom without locking the door, right? I knew something was wrong. So, I pushed the door open. She was sitting there near the toilet. The toilet lid was down. She was leaning against the wall with something sticking out of her arm. I didn't know what it was until I was older. At the time, I didn't know anything about drugs. And there was a syringe in her arm. So I thought she was sleeping and didn't want to wake her up. I just got my glass of water and went back to bed to continue sleeping. The next thing I knew, I was woken up by my mom's scream the next morning. The rest of the event is a blur to me. Flashing blue and red lights outside, phone calls and crying. My parents seemed to try to forget the whole thing, They never hired another babysitter. It wasn't until later that I learned they acted that way to hide something, so I wouldn't realize that my silence and lack of intervention had contributed to her death. It's been 10 years. Now that I look back, I can clearly see everything. All of the rules my babysitter made were a perfect plan. Me yelling out before I went downstairs was like an alarm for her to quickly stop whatever she was doing. But that night, if I had called my parents or done anything to get help, maybe she would still be alive. Last October, my husband Jace and I moved to Sacramento, California. My name is Lena, and we were excited to start a new life. Our neighbors to the right, Thorn and Mara, seemed to be around our age. We hoped we'd become good friends. The first week was peaceful. I was busy setting up the house and planting some flowers on the porch. I loved the sense of calm after years of living in a tiny apartment in Los Angeles. It was the best time before everything went downhill. Strange things began to happen about a month after we moved in. One night, I woke up to the sound of a woman sobbing. I nudged Jace, but he was fast asleep, so I just lay there and listened. The crying went on for a while, and then suddenly stopped. I didn't think much of it at the time and went back to sleep. The next morning, I saw Mara at the grocery store. She was pushing her cart carefully, constantly looking over her shoulder. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying, and her hands were trembling as she reached for a carton of milk. When I said hello, she jumped and looked at me with a panicked expression. It took her a few seconds to recognize me. She tried to smile, but it couldn't hide the fear on her thin face. When I got home, I told Jace about the strange encounter. From that point on, we started paying closer attention to the noises from next door. Over the next few days, the crying happened more often. Sometimes it was a piercing scream at 2 a.m. that would wake me up. Other times, it was a long, constant moaning that kept me from sleeping. Jace tried to comfort me, saying they might just be having marriage problems, but my gut told me it was something else. One weekend afternoon, I decided to take a box of homemade muffins over to their house. Mara opened the door just a crack. I immediately noticed bruises on her arms. When I asked if she needed any help, she just mumbled, "Thank you," and said she was fine before closing the door. That night, the noise from next door was worse than ever. There was screaming, things breaking, and a terrible argument that made me shake with fear. I begged Jace to call the police, but he said they probably needed some time to work things out and we shouldn't get involved. But I really wanted to help Mara. The next week, I went to visit Mara again. This time, she invited me in for tea. She began telling me about her terrible nightmares. She described being trapped in a dark place with dirt falling into her eyes and mouth. She said she tried to scratch the dirt away to escape, but the more she scratched, the more dirt fell. While she was talking, I took a closer look at the bruises on her arms. I was shocked to see they didn't look like bruises from being hit. They looked like deep scratches she had made herself. That day, Jace came home and told me in a serious tone not to go to Mara's house again. "I don't know what's happening over there, but I have a bad feeling about it, and I don't want you to get mixed up in it." I listened to him, but my heart ached for Mara. She needed a friend, someone to understand what she was going through. But that Friday night, everything changed, and I finally understood why Jace was so worried. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a sound from next door, but this time it was different. It was like someone was laughing and crying at the same time. Jace woke up too. He grabbed my hand as the moaning grew louder and more distorted. Suddenly, a piercing scream rang out. I recognized it as Mara's voice. Jace threw on a shirt and ran outside. I followed him. Jace knocked on the door hard, and Thorn opened it. He looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. He apologized for the noise and said Mara wasn't feeling well. Just then, we heard a moan from the living room, followed by a painful cry in Mara's voice. "Leave me alone!" "I can't take it anymore." Thorn's face went pale. He tried to close the door, but Jace had already peeked inside. I also caught a glimpse of a sight I will never forget. Mara was on the floor on her knees. Her hands and feet were in chains, her clothes were torn, and her hair was a mess. But the worst part was her fingers. They were bent backward, and her nails were caked in black blood. Mara was clawing at the wooden floor, making a horrible scratching sound. When she saw us, she looked up with all white eyes and a chilling smile. Thorn rushed to her, begged her to stop, and then turned back to us, begging us to go home. Jace pulled me back to our house. I was shaking and couldn't say a word. We lay in bed, too afraid to sleep. A few days later, Thorn came to our door. He looked completely different. He was thin, and his eyes were hollow. We invited him in, and he nervously told us the whole story. They had been married for a year. Everything was great at first, but then Mara started having terrible nightmares. She began hurting herself. Some nights she would scream and speak in a language Thorn had never heard before. The sounds didn't even seem human. Thorn had taken Mara to the doctor, but they only diagnosed her with a mental disorder. Thorn even invited a spiritual medium over, but the man ran out of the house screaming that Mara was possessed and then drove away. Thorn had no choice but to chain Mara when she started hurting herself and him. On the night we saw her, Mara suddenly became clear-headed and begged Thorn to save her. She confessed to him that when she was 21, she had an unwanted pregnancy with a man she couldn't even remember. Fearing being judged and ruining her career, she decided to get an abortion. Mara said that ever since then, she always felt like something was watching her. It started with strange dreams, but after she married Thorn and they moved into their new house, things got worse. She felt the presence of a child, a small, hateful spirit. It would whisper hurtful things to her, keeping her from sleeping or living a normal life. Thorn now understood why Mara was always waking up crying. She was hurting herself to punish herself. Thorn and Mara had a funeral mass performed by a priest. Mara confessed her sins to God and prayed for the spirit of the baby to be at peace. A few days later, Thorn and Mara came to see us. They looked much better. They told us they were moving to another city and apologized for all the trouble they had caused. They didn't say much about Mara's condition, just that they needed a fresh start somewhere else. I felt so much sympathy for Mara, a woman who had to live with the consequences of a past decision for so many years. But what I remember most is the love Thorn had for his wife. He never left her, even in the most difficult times. He was even willing to do things he never believed in before to save her. A young family now lives in the house next door. I often think about Thorn and Mara and wonder if they ever found peace in their new home.
Thank you for watching until the end. As mentioned earlier, our goal of reaching 50,000 subscribers in 2026 is still ongoing. If you enjoy these stories, please give us a hand and support us.